Okay. Good evening, everyone. And to Gail, I'll say good afternoon. sitting in Maryland. So tonight we're sort of continuing what we did last week, which is to talk about the patriarchs and matriarchs and what they did to form and to bind us, form a relationship with God, and to bind us in that relationship. And it's very powerful that we are learning this tonight, because tonight we were just talking before the share about how it's November 11th, but it's also the 11th of Mar Cheshvan. The 11th of Mar Cheshvan is the Yortzeit traditional. We don't have firm evidence, but there are a lot of traditions that the 11th of Mar Cheshvan tonight is the Yortzeit of Rachel Imenu. And tomorrow, Rivka and I will look out on Derech Hebron and see a lot of buses and cars going to Kever Rachel, right down the road from us, I'm going to say about 2 or 3 miles, south of us. A lot of people visit the traditional Kever tomb of Rachel Imenu. So it's very appropriate that tonight we talk more about the special relationship of Avraham, Sarah, and the continuing special relationship of the patriarchs and matriarchs that we as a nation try to emulate, number one. And number two, as we're going to talk about as we go forward, we try to pass on that tradition. And perhaps that may be one of the fundamental ideas in Judaism, this concept of us receiving from the previous generations and handing over to the next generations. The Hebrew word for tradition is Masorah, and the word Masorah literally means to hand over. The Latin trado means to give over. And for us, Masorah is a little bit different. It really means to truly hand over to the next people in line. And tonight we're going to talk more about that responsibility that started with Avraham and Sarah, and we still work on these days. Last week we emphasized that the household of Avraham and Sarah emphasized the character trait of chesed, kindness, and the chesed that they gave to others brought more and more people into the fold around them. Tonight, we're going to talk about totally different aspect of their personality and what it was that they were trying to imbue in their followers. So let's start with the verse. Even before we start the verse, look on the first page. Rivka, you got the sheet? Good. Look, at the bottom of the first page, there's a quote there from Rabbi Steinsaltz. Even before the verse, I'm going to read what it is that Rav Steinsaltz Olav Shalom wrote. God's purpose would be realized through Avraham, through Abraham. But that doesn't mean just Abraham, it means also Sarah and the patriarchs, matriarchs, as he was chosen to be the father of the nation. That would receive numerous blessings and inherit the land of Canaan, Eretz Yisrael. Since Canaan was promised to Avraham's descendants, it was fitting that Avraham be informed of God's plans for the land. So in other words, before we even see what Hashem is talking about in our verse, and you'll recognize it in a moment, it's important, according to Rav Steinsaltz of blessed memory, that the Jews understand that the special relationship with God is because of our responsibility here in Eretz Yisrael, specifically here in Eretz Yisrael. And that's why God isn't going to destroy 5 cities in Eretz Yisrael without informing the future owner of Eretz Yisrael, who of course is Avraham. So now let's take a look at the verse at the top of the page. And it's a difficult verse to translate, as you'll see in just a moment. And there are two parts of the verse that we're going to really concentrate on. The first half of the class tonight will be about the first term, and then a little bit later we'll get to the two other terms later in the verse. But let's see the verse overall. Ki yedativ. Very hard to translate that phrase. The translation on the page comes from the Jewish Publication Society. For I have singled him out. Literally, it means because or that or for I know him. Yedativ, but it's just saying I know him isn't enough. So this translation, I singled him out. Others say made myself known to him. Not just that I know him, but I made sure he knows me. So it can mean I know him, I chose him, I acknowledge him, I formed a relationship with him, I made a special agreement with him. All of these translations exist in different English versions of the Bible, and we'll do Rashi in just a moment on that. Because I have this, I'm going to say, special relationship with him, that his children, his boys, children, and his beito, his household after him will be charged, will be commanded. Vishamru derech Hashem, and they're going to guard, keepsake for posterity, the way of Hashem. They're the ones who are going to keep derech Hashem in this world. What is derech Hashem in this world? And this is the second part of the verse that we're going to talk about in about 15 to 20 minutes, which is lasot tzedakah umishpat, to do what is, my translation in front of us, just and right. Tzedek means justice. Mishpat again means justice. They're going to do tzedakah and mishpat. They're going to do justice and what's right. And we're going to talk more about those two terms a little bit later. Okay, we'll get to them. Lematan hevi Hashem al Avraham et asher diber alav. It's because we accepted the covenant and as a result behave in a manner that's described as tzedakah and mishpat, righteousness and justice, that as a result we have the covenant that was given by God and spoken to him by God, to Avraham Avinu. So we have that because we continue this path of life, which is described as tzedek, or tzedakah, and mishpat. So last week we emphasized chesed, kindness. That was the attribute that God saw, that God chose Avraham. But to keep the process going, to maintain this chain of tradition, what we require isn't just kindness, we require tzedakah, umishpat. We'll talk about those terms very soon. So Rashi jumps on the term kiyadativ, and he says this term about knowing him, this is an expression denoting affection. Yedativ really means I love that person. And we have that expression used in Psukim when we talk about the relationship between Adam and Chava. It says, Adam niyada et Chava. He knew her. So people joke about how the term knew in the Bible can have something to do with intimate relations. That's not true. It really means to know someone intimately, to know them really well, as opposed to most of our relationships tend to be relatively superficial. I mean, hopefully that's not my relationship with my wife and my children and my closest of friends, but with most people, And that's why we tend to say, if you know somebody in Hebrew, you don't say, Ani yodea oto. You say, Ani makir oto. I recognize him. Because most of our relationships, the vast majority, are relatively shitchi, are relatively surface ones. I recognize that person. I don't know what's going on inside them. And Yediyah is this more profound type of knowledge. And so I'm in the second line. Still, the primary meaning of these terms connected with the root yada is really that of knowing. For whoever holds a person in affection attaches him to himself so that he knows him well and is familiar with him. Okay, and why do I hold him dear? In other words, even though Rashi's emphasizing that there's affection here, but really it means deeper knowledge, stronger, powerful knowledge of the other person. And why does Hashem hold us so dear? This will be thus will he ever command his children, saying, keep the way of the Lord. Since it does not say here upon the house of Abraham, but upon Abraham himself, we may infer, we may learn from that he trains us up, that he trains up a righteous son as though he never dies. That one who trains a righteous child, that person doesn't die. In other words, if you used to say, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. If our children emulate our behavior, then our true persona lives on. And that hopefully is true children, then grandchildren, then great grandchildren. And so we are always here because our behavior patterns are continually copied and passed down. Okay. The Rashi is very beautiful. We're going to see a number of others, but I want to skip to the Chizkuni for just a second. The Chizkuni looks at this much more practically. Rashi, the Ramban, most of the other things we're going to say are much more like emotionally connected to the idea. The Chizkuni says something interesting. He should just point out to them that unless they followed their father's or master's tradition, they might wind up just as the people of Sodom would in short order. So he looks at it, it's not anything about deep emotional attachment. You better teach your kids because otherwise they'll turn out like Sodom and Gomorrah and they'll get wiped out, just like they did. Fire and brimstone will come down upon them. I think we can look at this in a much more positive way than the Chizkuni's approach, but I just thought it was cute. I couldn't resist putting it. But back to the Ramban. It is possible that the word Yedativ, know him, recognize him, am deeply connected to him, means I have raised him and elevated him so that he shall command his children after him. Now, I have given over a tradition, information, way of life to him. And so his children after him will to do that which is right before me. And therefore, I will make him a great and mighty nation so that he should serve me. The correct interpretation appears to me that the word Yedativ really means knowing. We're trying to look for deeper meanings, and it's true, there are, but the word really means knowing. He is thus alluding that God's knowledge, which is synonymous with his providence. Now, it's God's knowledge and God's action down here tend to be on the same wavelength, is to guard the species, and even the children of man are subject, despite it, to the circumstantial evil occurrences until the time of their visitation comes. In other words, bad things can happen even to good people because we're just part of what's going on down here. But as regards his pious, he directs his providence to know each one individually. So the Ramban is alluding to a very powerful mystical concept, which is called hashgacha pratit and hashgacha klalit. God, through the rules of science and nature, has what's called hashgacha klalit, general supervision. God invented the universe and the laws of nature and physics and all of that. That's called the general rules of divine supervision, the way God made the world run. However, for those special individuals, mainly Jews, we believe, but perhaps not exclusively, that try to follow God's specific plan for chesed, tzedek, mishpat, for kindness, righteousness, justice, those people God makes exceptions for, and we call that hashgacha pratit. So that's what the Ramban is alluding to here, that most of the world, the good and the bad, are all mixed up, and that earthquake swallows them all. But once in a while, hashgacha pratit, the specific plans for individuals, which we usually call miracles, take place to save those who are truly connected to Hashem, and they can bypass some of the normal features of natural phenomena. Rabbeinu Bechaye continues discussing these terms. For I know him intimately. I know him, but not just know him. I really have an intimate knowledge of him. I can see into his soul, God is saying. The root yada is used here in the sense of bestowing recognition upon someone. Just as in, it gives an example from Tehillim, from Psalms, Ma Adam v'tade'ehu. What is man that you should literally know him, is the Hebrew, but the translation here is put him on a pedestal. Who is man that you show much attention to him? Now, usually God just, doesn't have this intimate knowledge, this relationship with beings and things down here. Alternatively, the meaning of the word is that I have supervised him closely. So maybe it doesn't mean intimate knowledge and closeness. Maybe it means something else, and it means supervision. And that would be the hashgacha pratit, that the Ramban, this specific divine supervision that the Ramban was alluding to. The words ki dativ single out Avraham from other ordinary human beings. God doesn't have, or in those days didn't have, intimate relationships with many people. I'd like to think that there are a lot of people today, the Jews who try to keep the Torah, and I think even Hasidei Umot Olam, the good people amongst the nations of the world who try to be good people. I'd like to think Kadosh Baruch Hu has intimate relations with all of such people. But ordinary beings don't necessarily get it, who do not enjoy the constant supervision by God. They don't get hashgacha pratit, individual supervision. You should appreciate that God operates in this universe by means of both hashgacha klali, general supervision, which are laws of nature, and hashgacha pratit, particular personalized kind of supervision. The hashgacha pratit, personalized supervision of mankind, operates in the following manner. The supervision becomes manifest in God protecting people against mishaps. This type of benevolent supervision does not extend to Gentiles, to non-Jews, and not even to all Israelites except the righteous among them. Now, the Rambam, Maimonides, Rabbeinu Bechaye feels he is following the tradition of the Ramban, Nachmanides. He's less enamored of this idea that Gentiles can achieve this level, but Maimonides goes out of his way. The Rambam, in his laws of tshuva, says that anyone can get to Olam Haba if they really make the proper effort, and that includes non-Jews. Okay, Radak, below Rabbeinu Bechaye, et beito ve'et banav. So not just him, but his whole household and his children, both the members of his household who were not biologically related to him, as well as his family, in order to teach us that a man is obligated to monitor the conduct of all members of his household. If I have people in my household, even if they're not related to me, and I have some sort of responsibility for them, I have to teach them to be good people. I think this is true of teachers. I felt this was true when I had, roles in dormitories, both in Yeshiva University and then later with Yeshivat Miftah, with our Riskin's Yeshiva. I think it's very important that we take this responsibility for people that we have some charge over. And I think the point of the Radak is very important and very powerful. Bottom of the page, and this is the last comment on this idea of Yidativ, this intimate knowledge, close relationship. So the Torah is Rabbi Yaakov ben Asher, the son of the Rosh, and he wrote the original version of the Shulchan Aruch. And again, the translation here is, for I know him intimately. And he goes back quoting Rashi. So Rashi, he says, quotes Onkelos. The position of Rashi is that pshat, that literal meaning of the verse, which is available in the Aramaic translation, in understanding the word Yedativ as I love him. It's affection, which is a beautiful interpretation. I'm not sure it's the best. We've seen 6 or 7, but this is a very popular one. God is saying that the reason he loves Avraham is because he will command his family and people to observe the ways of God. The love, the Yediyah aspect of the relationship between Avraham and Hashem is because of Avram's commitment to hand over to the people he has responsibility over, hand over to them the ways of God. So the most important thing that we can do in our lifetimes is to make sure that those people that we have some responsibility toward, primarily children, but it could be students, that we have to make sure that we do everything in our power to make sure that they do follow Derech Hashem, the way of God, which is our tradition, which is Torah and mitzvah. Okay, top of the second page. I believe the word has to be understood as yedi'ah, true knowledge of someone, like one has knowledge of facts. Most people for us are a bit of a mystery. Gee, why does he act like that? Why does she do that? And we don't know. Okay. Usually it's none of our business, but a lot of people, we observe them and we're left with a lot of question marks, except for those few people with whom we become really, really close. And those people we really know. I know why. I know why he's doing that. I know why she's behaving that way, because this happened, that happened. It's about their daughter. It's about their son. It's about their job. It's about all sorts of things. God supervises Avraham minutely, even though we live in Olam HaShafel, even though we're living down here, far distance from the Olam HaEmet, the true heavenly space way up there. Although many people are assigned a role in life and are exposed to what appear as accidents of nature and qualified to live in higher regions of the universe, deserving individuals will always attract God's attention and protection. Avraham will be a prime example of such people. So we end that section of the discussion with one last translation that no one in the almost 40 translations into English that I looked up of this verse used before. Yedativ means have in this case, God's attention. Yedativ means I really have that person's attention. And think about, when we were raising our kids, and when I taught for 46 years in classrooms, almost always the thing that the students of whatever age, and children no matter what age, mostly what they wanted was attention. And this term yediyah means that you truly give to this individual your attention. And I just think that, out of all the translations, to a certain extent, I think this might be my favorite. That what they really want is they want your attention. And I found that with students, definitely with my children. It's just a very important idea. Now, I go out of my way to mention both my students and my children because there was a beautiful custom that if there were people in a Jewish community that couldn't have children for whatever health, biological reasons, the custom was that they should try to teach kids in the community because your students are also your children, and I think that idea is very beautiful, and I think that that's part of the idea that the tour is hinting at. Okay, we're now going to shift our focus a little bit away from the term yediyah, knowledge, relationship, and we're going to more look at the later part of the verse where it says that the reason that Avram is so special is because he guards the way of God and he does tzedakah umishpat. So we're going to try to understand what that entails. What does it mean to live a life of tzedakah and mishpat? So we're going to see a few different approaches, but we're going to start with Rabbi Sachs. And Rabbi Sachs, who I guess was involved in many organizations, is used to this expression he's going to use. In the first mission statement of the Jewish people, I remember sitting in some terrible meetings where the purpose of the meeting was to write a mission statement. It was always so hard. Two different schools I was involved in writing the mission statement, and okay, it's just a thankless job, but excuse me. But in this case, I think Rav Sachs is right that our pasuk, our verse, is to a certain extent telling us the mission statement of the Jewish people, which is Vishamru derech Hashem. They should guard, keep, observe the way of God, la'asot tzedakah umishpat, to perform tzedakah, righteous acts, mishpat, just acts. Okay, mission statement. God said, I have chosen him that he may instruct his children, his household after him, to keep the way of the Lord by doing what is just and right. Okay, it's hard to translate mishpat as right. Right is usually translated in Hebrew as yashar, but it's hard. It's just hard to translate. We want to get across the idea that tzedakah tends to be going beyond the letter of the law, and mishpat is generally following the letter of the law. And in both cases, there were, precedents within Jewish tradition, and we are keeping them, guarding them, and most importantly, passing them on. The way of the Lord is to act justly and righteously towards your fellow human beings. In context, this meant that God was inviting Avraham to pray on behalf of the people of Sodom. The purpose of informing Avraham, not according on the front of the page to the Chizkuni. I have to tell him about what's going to happen to these people because it could happen to his children if they don't behave. Okay, or the Radak who said, I have to tell him because he's going to be in charge of this area. He should know what's going on in his domain. The reason, according to Rabbi Sachs, is I want him to argue with me about this. It's so interesting. It's so interesting that, even a Kadosh Baruch Hu loves a good debate. Lahavdil. Chovat HaTalmidim is a sefer I don't often quote in the class, even though it's a very interesting Sefer. It was written by the Piasetzner Rebbe. The Piasetzner Rebbe wrote this around 1930, 1931 maybe, when he noticed between World War I and World War II that a lot of Jewish children who had in Eastern Europe, Poland, which was then under Russian control, which was then under Polish control, and Lithuania, and then Russia, and then all those areas were going to public schools. Before World War I, a lot of Jews, except in the big cities, went to Jewish schools, or they didn't go at all. But now he saw that we had to come up with certain ideas of pedagogy, how to teach Jewish traditions and Jewish ideas to people who are within another school system. And he wrote this book to help Jewish parents and educators to give over the traditions to their kids. And in his long introduction of that book, he writes, God mentioned, for I have known him. Just the last thing about the Piasetzner Rebbe, he later, when the war broke out, was taken to the Warsaw Ghetto, and he was considered the Rebbe of the ghetto until he was murdered. Okay, God mentioned, for I have known him, that he will instruct his children and his posterity to keep the way of the Lord. That's our verse. Every generation in Israel is a link in the chain of our legacy, the beginning of which is bound to Avraham. The beginning of that chain starts at Avraham Avinu and Sarah Imenu right next to him, holding hands, right? And the end of which is our Mashiach. We are, I'd like to think, toward the end of that chain, but we don't know how long this chain is, but we have to feel that we are a link in that chain, and that we have to not only forge the relationship backwards to get the material, we have to forge the next link in the chain forwards to hand over the material. In context, this meant that God was a generation. I went back to Rabbi Sachs. A generation receives its Torah, its faith, and its fear. Now, I would translate the word yira, I would translate as awe. A generation receives its Torah, its faith, and its awe from the generation that preceded. I got that from my parents, my grandparents, and my teachers. Then uses them, the faith, the awe, use them to serve God, and then passes them on to the next generation, that he may instruct his children, is the essence of our survival. The Jewish nation continues to exist, and I'd like to think to thrive, because of the Masorah, because of the chain of tradition. And that's the true essence of the verse. It's less important to know exactly what Chesed, Tzedek, and Mishpat are. What's most important is to see how it was modeled by those who came before us, and how we then must model that behavior for those who come after us. I'm going to leave Rav Amital for last, so I'm going to go to the bottom of the page. Rav Binyamin Zimmerman is a teacher and writer in Yeshivat Har Etzion, a younger man, and he is commenting exactly on our verse again, and he's taking this, as you can see from the Rambam. Essentially, the Rambam is informing us that Derech Hashem, the way of God, the path of God, the road of God, which the forefathers walked in, is emulating the divine attributes to the point of being able to model one's behavior after God's actions. This is different a little bit than what the Chovat HaTalmidim was saying. That we have a greater responsibility than the Piasetzna said. The Piasetzna said, all I have to do is look at my father and my Rebbe, and I'm ready. That's it. And I'm going to pass on. Rav Zimmerman is making it a little bit tougher. I have to really learn Torah well enough not to just copycat the behavior of those that came before me, but I have to look at the original sources and see something that's mine that I can add to this. Ooh, see what Hashem said here? Now I can tell my children something that I never learned from my father. And they're both right. I think the major material that we give to the next generation is what we got from those who came before us. But everybody does it with their own nuance. Everybody does it with a taste of their personality and their style. And so it's not enough, Rev Zimmerman is saying, to just mimic, model the mimetic tradition that I got from before, but I should add something. There should be, I'm making my mother's vegetable soup, but I add my own new something to it, my own new spice or my own. It's my version of my mother's vegetable soup. So it's the same thing. In other words, I'm giving over to my children what I got from my rabbis and my teachers, but it includes a little bit of spice, a little bit of flavoring that I added to the recipe. And I think this idea is extremely important as well. Yes, it should be what you got from the generations before, but also I am adding something. And when we talk about this, we say the focus is not only on action, but on cultivating virtuous dispositions. It's not just what we do, it's how we do it. We have to do it with love and attention and care. It may be that for this exact reason, the Rambam focuses on the verse, which is a promise and not a command. The ideal of modeling ourselves after God's holiness is born of true emulation, copying, transforming our being. I did everything I could to become that person that the Torah and my Rebbe and my grandparents taught me about. But it still got something of me. God does not act because of commands. He acts because he is good. If I'm going to be nice to somebody, am I doing it because it's a mitzvah? Or am I doing it because I'm supposed to be nice? I'd like to think it's both. And therefore everybody's going to have their own flavoring. They're they're going to add their own spice. Everybody's going to do it a little bit their own way, because we're not just doing it because it's the mitzvah. We're also doing it because we know it's right and we want to do what's right. God is called such, but man, created in his image, can become such. God is the epitome of what is good and right and just and kind. I'm not the epitome of it, but I can make myself the epitome of it. The pursuit of tzedakah umishpat is itself imitate Dei, is emulation of God, and thus the highest form of ritual worship. The greatest avodah, the greatest divine service, worship, is try to be the way God told us to be, because that's the way God is. Much easier to say than to do, but it's that's what we're supposed to be modeling. We're trying to. Gee, I have to do what's right. I think it's wonderful that my kids saw me on occasion really struggle with ideas. Is what I should do this. I'm glad they saw that. Um, it's not always easy, but who said it was supposed to be easy? But we're supposed to do it because it's right. It's whether it's a mitzvah or it's not a mitzvah, it's the right thing to do. And ultimately, the pursuit of tzedakah mishpat is itself emulation of Hashem, and that's the truest form of avodah, divine service. Okay, Rav Amital is talking about our topic, very much so, of course, but he's putting it into a different context. So far, everything I've been talking about has been really about education and parenting, and that's what it sounds like we're talking about in the verse too. Rav Amital is trying to look at it from a bigger perspective, and he's not just talking about building family and building a school and maybe building a community. He's also talking about nation building. And I think this is important for us as well. Rav Amital's attitude to the state of Israel rests on two foundations. The first is the ethical. Jewish nationalism has a universalistic moral orientation. Universalistic moral. It's about universal truths that we believe don't just have to do with Judaism, have to do with humanity and kindness and goodness, bigadol, in the big picture. And it must be moral, good, kind. Maimonides writes, the Rambam writes, that Avraham's goal was to found a nation that would know God and serve him. The Rambam talks about that in actually in the laws of idolatry in the first chapter, where he talks about how Avraham moved away from that. Okay, this goal derives from Avraham's trait of chesed. The first thing that got Avraham out of the mold that had existed before him in Ur Kasdim was this sense of, I must be kind. Chesed was number one. From the desire to do good to all. For this nation would convey to mankind, Derech Hashem, the way of God, to do righteousness and justice. Our verse. So in other words, he started from kindness, and then when he started heeding the instructions of God, he started to put them into this rubric, into this outline that it was based mostly on tzedek and mishpat, righteousness and justice. This universal mission. And when you read the verses about Avraham Avinu, you have to understand that the mission is universal, because there weren't any other Jews. And we see from Shlomo HaMelech also that he went out of his way to teach non-Jews as well. So we see that the message is universal. This universal mission creates national responsibilities. Since the Jewish people have this universal mission, our national reality has to be of a special kind. As Rav Avraham Yitzchak HaKohen Kook taught, in order to redeem humanity from its suffering, it is necessary for this nation, us, the Jewish people, Am Yisrael and Medinat Yisrael, to forge a distinctively Jewish polity, system of government, with all the accoutrement of government and culture that will thereby demonstrate that not only pious individuals, but whole, and I'm going to add the word pious, whole pious nations as well. The goal is the nation, the Medina, should be pious, religious, firm. Okay? Firm in the sense, and religious in the sense of nice and caring and sweet. But whole nations as well can live by the light or Lagoyim. He's quoting now from Yeshayahu, Isaiah. The whole nations as well can live by the light of the divine idea. Rav Kook feared that were the Zionist idea to be divorced from a universal moral purpose, it would lead to chauvinism, I only care about us, moral breakdown, not being so nice at all, and reliance solely on coercive power and military strength. This vein in Rav Kook's teaching was essential to Rav Amital's thought. Even on those occasions when his realism prevented him from making overly romanticizing the actual state of Israel, especially after tomorrow night's Yortzeit. Rav Amital was very, very much disturbed and changed by tomorrow night's Yortzeit is that of Yitzhak Rabin. The murder of the prime minister of his nation disturbed Rav Amital very, very much. And it wasn't because they agreed on everything, but it's because he was the head of Am Yisrael, Medinat Yisrael, and that a Jew murdered him was something that is very difficult. It was very difficult for Rav Amital to live with. When his realism prevented him from making overly romanticizing the actual state of Israel, Rav Amital viewed the state as a vehicle, nevertheless, still, as sanctifying God's name in the world. Our job is always Kiddush Hashem. Our job is always sanctifying the name of God. Hence his powerful sensitivity to anything involving the state that might, God forbid, smack off Chilul Hashem, embarrassing our religion and causing a profanation of God's name. God forbid. Rav Amital's Zionism was not a response to anti-Semitism. We don't need a Jewish nation because of the Holocaust or because we're not safe in New York. That's not why we need a Jewish nation. It is not the terrible suffering that is the source of his longing for redemption, but rather it's striving to do good to mankind, for this is the essence of his soul. We don't need a nation because it's not safe out there. We need a nation to teach the world what it means to be good, to be righteous, to be just, to make a Kiddush Hashem, to sanctify God's name. That's why we need a nation. This from a Holocaust survivor was astounding. He came here, straight from the camps, and that he had this wonderful attitude about what kind of Medina we needed is inspiring, of course. Promoting a universal ethical vision must be the essence of Zionism. When someone thinks, I'm not talking about an anti-Semite. I'm not talking about those terrible people on the streets of Amsterdam or people on many campuses throughout the world. I'm talking about normal human beings who objectively look at something done by Jews and by Eretz Yisrael. Their thought should be, they're doing this because it's the right thing to do. That we must all, that's why it's so important that the government explain why it does things And it's important that we have good people doing it. Abba Eban was not a religious man, even though there were other people in the government around him who were more traditional than he. But what he did in beautifully describing the behavior of the Medina was a Kiddush Hashem. And we need that again. We're not always as good at it as we should be. So promoting a universal ethical vision must be the essence of Zionism, he said, not only to save it from the moral hazards of violent chauvinism, of only caring about ourselves, but precisely because the ethical message is itself the divine word that Israel is charged with spreading in the world. Rav Amital took our pasuk. Go back, please, for one last minute to the pasuk. For I have singled him out that he may instruct his children and his posterity to keep the way of the eternal, the way of God, by doing what is just and right, in order that the eternal may bring about for Abraham what has been promised him. The Jews get the land not just because of the promise, but for the purpose of acting in a way which is tzedek and mishpat. That's the deal, Rav Amital says, Rav Kook said. It's extremely important that we understand that. It's not just a personal commitment of my father to me and me to my children, or my teacher to me and me to my students. It is a national commitment that we have to build a nation which rational observers see is filled with tzedakah and mishpat. I think we do a pretty good job. Doesn't mean we can't do better. It means we can't always strive higher and higher. But I think overall, we do a good job of it. And it's something that we have to make sure is not just about how I guide my children. It's also about how I vote. I should be voting for people who I think are going to make sure that Medinat Israel is a Kiddush Hashem. And all of these ideas have to be with us constantly. We can't let our guard down. And I hope that we are children of Avraham and Sarah, and that we are up to the task. I really think we are, and I pray that we have divine support in fulfilling this ultimately important Mishima job and role that we have. It's not enough just to give it to our kids. We have to make sure that our country, our people represent this as well. And it's a worthwhile job, and I think we're overall on the right road, and we just have to continue working hard at it as long as we can until we get to the end of the road, which is Mashiach, and we're told Gold Star did the job. Okay, thank you so much. Oh, thank you for that kind comment. And thank you for coming in, especially thank you for coming in from the States, Gail. So good to see everybody. And people that aren't here, please let them know that sometime tomorrow morning, I hope to get up the recording. Okay, thank you so much for coming. Erev Tov.